This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review with Gilad Halpern.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate, brought to you by the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, which promotes humanistic, democratic and liberal values in the social discourse in Israel. I'm your host Gilad Halpern, and every week I'll be engaging in close encounters of the intellectual kind with writers and scholars, or simply people of ideas of all types and vocations who have done something to make our lives a tad more interesting. My guest today is a historian and education scholar. She's the president of Oranim Teachers College in the north of Israel. And today we're going to talk about one of her fields of scholarly as well as personal expertise, the decline and fall of the kibbutz empire, so to speak. Professor Yaarah, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello, thank you.
So the kibbutz movement, once the darling of the Zionist enterprise and a form of agricultural and collectivist lifestyle that swept the imagination of socialists worldwide, has been, since the late 1980s, a shadow of its once glorious past. The very selective communities that they once were are now struggling to attract young and professional members. The collective economy that they once ran has been almost completely privatized, and generally the word kibbutznik is often associated with grumpy dinosaurs than with the pioneering, self-sufficient tan soldiers of yore. So my first question to you, could all this have been avoided? Was there any way that the kibbutz could have succeeded?
First, we have to ask, Jews always answer with another question,
Sure.
right? So we have to ask, did they fail?
Mm-hmm.
They don't think so. They've changed their manners and their economy and their community, but they don't think they failed. They feel very successful right now.
How
and
so? Because
reasons.
they're no longer a force to be reckoned with. Their original lifestyle has been completely dilapidated.
It depends how do you define completely.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was born in a kibbutz and my mother still lives in a kibbutz in the south part of Israel, in the Negev, in the desert. And this kibbutz is still a community based on equality and sharing of property, etc. So it's quite similar to the way it was, 100 years ago.
But that's really an exception and confirms the rule, isn't it?
The strong and wealthy kibbutzim, even today, are still very communal. In their,
but there's still a minority out of
It is a minority, but it's a very strong minority. As you know, in Israel, we have many strong minorities.
Sure.
So, one question, did they fail? One very successful fact about the kibbutzim, that even though they had a great crisis in the 80s, and we'll talk about it later, why and how, and when exactly, they recovered. Mm-hmm. It's not the same community based on equality and sharing of budget, but still they are successful. They live on the same lands that once they had. They more or less have the same lifestyle, even though they are part of the ultra-modern world. They still have some kind of modesty about them, and self-fulfillment or autarky, if you would like. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, they manage to keep their lifestyle.
So your mother still lives on Kibbutz Avivim, but you are a professor, a professional, and you live in Tel Aviv. Isn't that in itself a failure of the kibbutz? You personally, but you're of course representative of your generation.
So let's start from the beginning. When the first kibbutzim was created more than 100 years ago, really in the early years of the 20th century, they didn't know what will happen from the kibbutz on. It was a great idea, affected and influenced by communist ideas, and it was even before the Russian Revolution.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that they didn't know what is going to happen. For example, they didn't have a straightforward ideology. So about growing children, their own children, they didn't have a straightforward ideology. They didn't know that they want to keep the kids together in the same house and that they will only visit their families and parents 3 hours a day. It was a necessity. They had somehow to keep the kids, the babies, together. They didn't even think about babies because they were a group of young people that wanted to have good time and to get away and get rid of their parents and families and tradition. They arrived to those beautiful places. They worked very hard during the day. They danced all night. And they didn't even think about children. But when you put young women and young men together at the same place and they dance all night, after a year, you have a baby, and then you have to deal with it. So they didn't have any idea or any
they just
thinking.
Improvised as they went along.
They improvised and they tried to understand what those babies need desperately. And they needed a place.
But that was in the early years. As the movement progressed, it became very ideological and very dogmatic. And that's perhaps one of the things that brought it down.
Okay, so but it happened after 40 or 50 years. And then when the State of Israel was initiated in 1948, then the kibbutzim was leading movement and the leading avant-garde. So everybody looked at the kibbutzim to get an idea what will be the right lifestyle, or everyone wanted to be part of this amazing, group of fantastic people. They were really pioneers. And then they really thought, they had this idea that they created the State of Israel. And they are now managing and directing it.
In many ways it was true, right? Because many of them were central functionaries in the ruling party, in the Labour Party.
Right, and in the army and everywhere, basically. So, and their system of education was, bright and brilliant, and all the best teachers were there in the kibbutzim. But half of the population was left behind. And many times you don't hear the story of women. So 50% of the population got a stronghold in politics and in the economy of the young State of Israel and in the public sphere, everywhere in the public sphere. But the women were left behind. And
even in the kibbutz movement, the supposedly egalitarian kibbutz movement.
That's the problem, that they had this awareness of being equal about everything. But the women basically was pushed to the babies' homes and to the kindergartens and to the services. And the men were out there, having fun in Tel Aviv, coming back for the weekend. But the women with the children stayed in the kibbutz and in the gap between the ideology or the way they presented themselves and the real life on the ground was disappointing for the women. But they could not say it. So basically they pushed themselves to the side, to the margins of the kibbutz society, without letting us, the second generation, know that they are frustrated. They would never agree to declare their frustration. So we, the second generation, just got it by gut feelings.
Right.
It was never spoken.
And that turned you away from the kibbutz in a way? Did this develop hard feelings that you only later in life could put into words?
So first it created among them, the mothers, a double message. The spoken message, everything is all right, we are an equal society, but you had this hidden agenda or hidden message of women, we'll just take you to our house or to the room, because the parents' room was not home. It was only parents' room. So we were taken to the parents' room.
As visitors. Right?
As visitors, 3 hours a day. But the women, as the kibbutz grew and became more and more powerful, took the children to the parents' room from home, because the children's house was the home, and created some kind of a subculture.
Subculture in what way?
A culture of women that takes the children to the room, and now they bake for them.
So it's unofficial.
It's unofficial, and if you will be asked, say, just because he was sick, it's just for the week, his father went away, I cannot manage 3 kids at the time.
Okay, so this brings me to another question, perhaps more
Just to come back to your question about the second generation. So first you have the first generation that the women start to cook and they start to be more and more busy and bothered by the home and less with the work and the ideology. And then the second generation have this double message. They don't know what to do with it. So either they just surrender to the women way or they surrender to the men's way. Men felt great in the kibbutz. What bad about it? They were the kings of the world. Mm-hmm. Or they had to find themselves a third way and they had to leave.
Okay, that's very interesting. But again, it all boils down, and if we can now perhaps try and analyze it in a more in an intellectual way, it was a groundbreaking social experiment, as you said.
Right.
Children were willingly taken away from their parents' home and weren't raised by them. They were raised by professional parents, as it were. Wasn't that also something that made the kibbutz doomed to fail because it's something that humanity just couldn't put up with?
It's a question. I'm not sure I can answer it, since the Oedipus complex is based on the fact that the child must find a way to get rid or get the mother far away, pushed her back and can identify himself with the father. Mm-hmm. So maybe, and that was the idea of the early kibbutzim, that the mother should be kept away from the child. And that all the problem of the Western modern society is the fact that the children cannot process in the right manner their childhood or cannot grow up in a family with a strong mother, etc. Okay? Mm-hmm. So the kibbutzim look at that and they say, okay, let's push the mother to the side. We'll keep her in the picture, but as a side person. And the metapelet, the one who takes care of the kids in the kindergarten, she's the main figure for the children. And there is something right about it. So I don't know what is humanity all about, Maybe the way primitive tribes educated their children in a group without taking care so much of the family or the bourgeois family. Maybe it's a better way to look at it. The crucial moment is 1977. Since the Likud came to power in 77, the kibbutzim lost its edge as avant-garde. They were not pioneers anymore. And they were
because the government didn't see them as such.
Because the government didn't give them the budget they need in order to keep their status as avant-garde.
Yes.
It's a financial question, first of all. Mm-hmm. And since then, a lot of things that were somehow buried in the underground of the kibbutz, unheard, hidden agenda, frustration without speaking about it, became part of the open-air discussion. Mm-hmm. So you had a lot of frustration of women, of children, of second generation. What happened to the second generation? The first generation were revolutionaries. They came to the kibbutz, they threw behind their back all the tradition and their parents and their homelands, etc.
And changed the world.
And they, of course, and they are very proud of themselves, changing the world without any modesty, by the way. And the second generation should have followed their lines, keep on the path. Mm-hmm. So the path was a revolutionary one. But they, as a second generation, should walk on the same path created in a very glorious way by their parents. But their parents were inspiring, so they were inspired by their revolutionary atmosphere. Mm-hmm. So what are you supposed to do? It's the double talk. You want your children to be conformist or non-conformist, as you were. Mm-hmm. So the second generation suffered from many psychological problems, maybe because they were grown up together in the same, kindergarten. And all that collapsed in 1977.
Because it was instigated essentially by the financial element, the fact that the kibbutz at the end of the day was not financially self-sufficient as they had tried to be. So what I'm asking is,
they told the story of financial independence, but it was wrong.
It was wrong.
Yeah.
So they lied mainly to themselves.
Yeah, that's the open air phase. Everything was just, they cried it out loud now.
Oh, so suddenly after 1977, they started saying we were never financially independent.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And maybe the ideology of equality was never really kept, and maybe the ideology of men and women are part of the same business were not, maybe all those ideas were not really kept, but only ideas.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm asking is, the, say, emotional breakdown of the kibbutz, or the hard feelings that started to float, as you just said, and the fact that the business model collapsed, were really interwoven. It wasn't just a coincidence that they both came to the fore in the 1980s.
No, it was, I think that the financial crisis and the political crisis, we didn't have any positions.
In government.
The kibbutz were not strong anymore in any way. So since the very chauvinistic maybe or paternalistic way of the kibbutzim to control the Israeli society, since that became untrue, all the feminist feelings and frustrations just came up to be declared.
And I want to ask you something now about the education system in the kibbutz, and actually the education itself, the content. How was it inspired by everything that you just said about this tension, unresolved tension between conformism and revolutionary spirit, and also the fact that they were powerful externally, but pretty weak internally? Was any of this reflected in the way children were educated in the kibbutz?
I think that your description is correct. I mean, you had those two streams going one by the other all the time. It was very weak and it was very strong. You would have those strong intellectuals who didn't go to the business or to the law firms or to the politics, to the national politics, but they would stay in the kibbutz and they saw the best way to fulfill themselves as career people in being educators for those children who will change the world.
Mm-hmm.
We were the new person, the new Adam.
Yep.
The new first home of Premier Rome, as Albert Camus put it. So we were the new generation that will bring the revolution, and to educate us was the most powerful way to fulfill yourself.
Right.
And so we got that, and it was really revolutionary. The way they took us out, the way that they created for us a system where we didn't have to pass exams, we were not oppressed in any way, but at the same time, we were pushed to be exactly equal. I mean, there was no way that someone will be so creative that he can feel better than others in the same class. So how do you create a group of children based on equality and egalitarian ideas that's supposed to be very creative, that you push them forward to achieve their missions and goals, but you consider them all equal by all means.
Yeah.
And you don't let them...
So again, it's this dual message. On the one hand,
Exactly.
Fostering ambition, and on the other...
depressing or pressing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that was our feelings, that you had to choose which way you go. You had two messages at the same time.
Yeah.
Conflicting or contradicting each other, and you had to choose if you're creative and ambitious or you're egalitarian and you just go. So, but I think that's the same question always go with pioneering. That was the main idea.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to ask you now, because we'll soon have to wrap up. Did you ever think about raising your children on kibbutz, or was it something that every time it popped to your head, you just said, "Oh no, absolutely not"?
I wouldn't raise a child in a kibbutz, of course. I chose to live in Tel Aviv.
Yes.
I need my privacy. You know that in the kibbutz, I always say, we didn't have any intimacy and we were never anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
So think about it, that a group of people all know all, and you never have a moment on your own. You have no privacy. Maybe in the toilet if you can get 3 minutes there, but it's, collective one, so you always have to share it too.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have any way you can be anonymous because they all know you. That's very hard. That was the main issue for many children, second generation like me, that wanted to raise their children in their private home where they can feed them as they wish, if you can say so.
Yeah.
I wouldn't think about it. But I must admit that the kibbutz today, after 20 years of severe crisis, managed somehow to recover.
Mm-hmm.
And many children from the second generation or the third generation now go back to the kibbutz to live there because it's comfortable and it's nice and it's still modest and it involves nature.
Because the city has become a jungle.
Exactly.
Mm.
It's better to be in the...
exactly, in the
fields.
protected space
Exactly.
of the kibbutz rather than in the...
reserve, maybe, in the natural reserve.
Exactly. All right, Professor Yaarah Baron, this was really fascinating, and I thank you very much for coming in today and telling us about the history, both personal and national, of the kibbutz movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of our show today. Thank you very much for listening. Also, big thanks to Alex Benish, the technical producer of this show. I'm Gilad Halpern, signing off here in Tel Aviv. Do join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.
תנגן, אני מקשיבה, זה חוזר וחוזר, ניגון רודף מילה. לחפש משמעות סמויה, תנגן, להסיר את הדממה.